Good morning, everyone. We're going to be hearing a story of David interacting with a man by the name of Nabal and his wife Abigail. This is found in 1 Samuel 25. And to start off the story, we're just going to reintroduce what happened last time. When last we left off, David had been hiding in a cave, and him and his men were in this cave and were hiding from Saul, who was out to capture them. Um, what happened was David and his men hiding in the cave were in there waiting for Saul. Saul went in there to use the washroom, and David had an opportunity on his hands to kill Saul. Instead, he chose to cut off a segment of his cloak. And when Saul left the cave later on, David told him, Saul, I don't mean you any harm. You were so close to me that I cut off a part of your cape or cloak, but did not kill you. Surely you have no reason to be scared of me. I don't know why you're still after me. Saul, realizing that he has been doing wrong to David, agrees, okay, I'll leave you, I'll let you be. But we're going to hear very soon after that Saul changes his mind. The story starts off, though, with just a quick little heading, which indicates that Samuel has died. After the many years of him acting as a judge and helping Saul and David make wiser decisions, Samuel has died and all of Israel mourns. We now go to where David is still fleeing from Saul, and he is finding himself in the foothills of Maon. He and his men have been seeing shepherds that are spending time out in the countryside, and he has made sure that his men are keeping an eye on them and keeping them safe. Shepherds have a difficult task to take care of the sheep and goats, but also to keep thieves and robbers and wild animals away. And so David understands this because he had a time in his life was a shepherd and wants to offer assistance when he can. So over the next while, he spent some time keeping watch over these shepherds, and he eventually has his men with the shepherds return back to their master, a man by the name of Nabal. And there, David tells Nabal a short story. He says, Nabal, or his men at least, Nabal, I've been watching your men, and I've been keeping them safe, and I have a soft spot in my heart for shepherds. And I'm wondering if you'd be willing to return the favor to me, as I have been good to your men, and I would love that you'd be good to my men. We are in need of provisions, and it'd just be a returning of kindness. Nabal, though, reacts in a pretty negative way. He has this opinion that David is actually just some sort of outlaw. He's a thief. He's someone that hasn't followed his master's rules. He says, who is this David? Who is this son of Jesse? Who is this man that runs away from his task and has not followed through on his duties? And he essentially chastises David's men and turns them back away and says, no, I'm not going to give you any food. You don't deserve any of my food. You haven't earned it, so leave me. David, if we know anything about him, does not respond very well to this. He is a man who is prone to violence. It specifically says, actually, later on in David's life that he is not allowed to build a temple because he shed too much blood. David has done a lot of things in his life already at this point. He's killed a lot of people, and he has an issue where it's difficult for him to keep himself tempered. That is, to not overreact. And so what David does is, with his 400 men, he has 600 men, it sounds like, following him around, his mighty fighting men. David says, come men, we will go to Nabal's house and we will kill every male that is in his household, because of the insult he has paid to us. Now, as is happening, Abigail is told by one of the servants who was witness to what Nabal had said to David. This servant tells Abigail, we had these men that were following us and they were keeping us watch. They were good men. They were doing us well. And they came down to ask for some help from Nabal. And Nabal reacted very poorly to them and was rude to them. And now they are coming to get us. So Abigail understands what's happening and acts to intervene and to cause not unnecessary bloodshed. So what she does is she packs a bunch of donkeys, full of food. We read in the Bible that is a lot of food. It's 2 skins full of wine. I think it's 200 loaves of bread, a bunch of cakes and stuff like that. There's a lot of stuff there that should be adequate for David's men to be fine with. She saddles the donkeys. She loads them up, and her, along with some of her companions, make their way up into the mountains where David's men have been waiting. Now the two cross paths with each other, and Abigail essentially defends, or not defends. No, she says to David, "David, you don't want to do this. This isn't good." She says, "Listen, my husband Nabal, he is a fool. His name means fool, and there's no reason to bring bloodshed upon his household because of what he's done." She says, "David, you have an important job to do in Israel, and you have bigger fish to fry in a sense, and you don't need to be plagued by unwise decisions made in anger and in haste. And there's a lot of things that God's going to be doing for you, and it's important for you to remember that and to be sort of on guard from these sorts of situations." So she does a really good job of convincing him that this isn't worthy, this isn't necessary, let God deal with it. You don't need to have this bloodshed on your hands. And David realizes the wisdom of her advice, which is something that's a really interesting characteristic of David. Even as a king, he doesn't just have wisdom, but he also listens to wisdom. And he is able to tell his men, okay, like that's reasonable. We're going to leave it here, and then he blesses Abigail before leaving her. Abigail returns home, and she finds her husband has been feasting. He is drunk. He is in high spirits. And the next day she tells him what happened. This causes him to have a heart attack. And a few days later, about 10 days later, he dies. And we hear of David returning and actually marrying Abigail. Now, there's a couple of cool things that we can sort of notice about this. That Abigail, the woman, is the intercessor here, is the person that's mediating between two other parties, which is an unusual situation that a woman would find herself in Israel at that time, given the status symbol or the status sort of ranking that women have, which is lower than men. Another thing is David's violent tendencies are sort of given evidence here. There's a part of David that is violent, is prone to violence, except over time he can be convinced that it's not wise. We can also understand that there's some overarching sort of things happening here. The sense of how David was treated by Nabal gives us a sense that David isn't the perfect man, and isn't someone that everyone loves in Israel. I would be surprised to know that Nabal has never spoken to David, that Nabal has never heard of David before. He may have heard of him and may go after, or maybe on the side of Saul, because Saul's been probably saying a lot of things about David that are negative. Right? David's a wanted man. He's being pursued by the kings. I wouldn't be surprised if people heard about this. But we also get an idea that that God's got this plan that's sort of that's working out, and he's using pretty unusual characters to sort of make that all happen. We also hear at the very end of the story that David marries Abigail. He also marries another woman, and at the same time, Saul actually gives Michal away. That's David's wife that helped him flee with the idol in the bed. Saul gives Michal away to another man, trying to make connections. So there's all these interesting things that are sort of happening here, and we're starting to come to a head of when David and Saul are going to have this interaction, or this sort of final meeting in a sense. And then David's going to have the power of transferred over to him. So I hope this was helpful. This was 1 Samuel 25. And please let me know if you have any questions.